JJ Cool, the Ilhan Omar censoring has to be long-term strategy to undermine her and to an extent the progressive movement. The Democratic leadership might catch heat this week, but nobody will withhold their vote for Pelosi just because of this. Meanwhile, the next election will be filled with ads about Omar getting censured for anti-Semitism. The details won't make a difference at this point. It's disappointing that the irony of Omar's money in politics missed by so many. Yeah, well, look, of course, I agree with this totally. And I will remind you that it was the Democrats who censored Move On when it was General Betrayus, who just coincidentally ended up being prosecuted or not prosecuted enough for betraying us by basically giving up government secrets. And it was also the Democrats who voted to defund Acorn. They are super weak in this situation, and they will capitulate to either. I shouldn't say either. I should say both big money donors and also a perception that the center is somehow offended. You know, there was what was it, Waldman we were talking to about that Ben Wickler quote about just the Democrats get very, very nervous about what the mainstream punditocracy says, whereas Republicans don't care. In fact, they wear it as a badge of honor that yeah, it's really what we're really seeing, I think, in many respects, is a Islamophobia. And, you know, this is where folks like we had problems for a long time with folks like Sam Harris because they mainstream this stuff and they make it sound like it can be intellectual. Now, of course, I don't know that he's responsible for this, but, you know, the general tenor.
And
for
also,
instance,
can I just read this quote really quick from Congressman Juan Vargas, though? Because he showed the ball. He said, it's disturbing that Rep. Omar continues to perpetuate hurtful anti-Semitic stereotypes that misrepresent our Jewish community. Total smear and lie. Just have to always say that. Additionally, questioning the support for the U.S. relationship, a U.S.-Israel relationship is unacceptable. That's the bottom line. He's saying that any questioning of a policy set around a sovereign nation state, one that by any objective international standard is in violation of any number of laws and norms and abuses and so on. But frankly, even if it wasn't, I mean, just the premise that if you're in Congress, you can't criticize France or India or Zimbabwe or Israel is utterly demented.
Well, particularly when we're giving them
so Egypt
yes,
or
exactly,
Saudi,
exactly.
Yeah, bring in groups, bring in countries that we fund and subsidize.
But yes,
sure.
that is the subtext. All right, let me just do this here. That is the subtext of what's going on. The text, of course, is that there's an opening here for people who want to launder a policy of not questioning Israel by arguing that it's anti-Semitism, and they're being aided and abetted because there's already a healthy dose of Islamophobia in this country. Here is an activist at the West Virginia State House, not a Democrat. Maybe she is. I don't know. But I can't hear you.
It's a GOP-sponsored event.
Yeah, this is a Republican-sponsored event. And so this is an opening, right? I mean, this is what we're seeing is the Israeli lobby, and it comes in various forms, using Islamophobia in this instance as essentially a way of laundering a censoring of any critique of Israel. And I can tell you that as a supporter of Israel, this does not end well for Israel. Every time you do this on a short-term basis, and even these tiny little victories that you get end up hurting Israel in the long term. But here is this some woman at the West Virginia State House, and this is really, this is the level 2 subtext of the criticism that we're seeing of Ilhan Omar.
So they all know. They know who I am. You can ask them.
She's got a poster Never forget, you said, with pictures of the Twin Towers and a picture of Ilhan Omar. I am the proof you have forgotten. So this is the worst of the worst when it comes to Islamophobia, and it's just stunning. I mean, this is, and it is being perpetrated in the name of anti-Semitism, when in fact it is the exact same response, but just a different flavor. That's basically what we're seeing. The same amount of hate, just a different flavor. And it's being weaponized by those who don't want critique of Israel. And like I say, as a longtime supporter of Israel's right to exist, this is the greatest threat to the future of Israel. These people who think that they're helping out right now and inoculating Israel from criticism. Huge mistake. Huge mistake.
Well, at least they're saying the quiet parts out loud.
Right. But it's a real problem. I mean, because this is not going to end well for Israel.
Well, it's not going to end. I think just to make a little distinction, I think it's not going to end well for the type of people you're talking about, who definitely exist. And I fundamentally disagree, and I think this is disgusting. But I know people who have what I think is an inaccurate and wrong but sincere misunderstanding about this issue. But the broader kind of context of where Israel's at right now, I think, is just, this does work for the current iteration of Israel, because this is just like raw brute force to destroy any opposition to it.
Right. But my point is, it's like saying...
And if you're building alliances with, Orban and Hungary and the Chinese government, doesn't matter.
That may be the case. But it is essentially like ignoring, that you have an infection and pretending that you don't and not treating it, instead of trying to pretend like there's nothing wrong with what Israel is doing. Because at one point this stuff catches up with you. And it has. And that's why it's reaching this level of desperation. Here is Bari Weiss, who's
reaching us into a level of desperation.
Yeah, well, I mean, she is, it's quite clear, whether she's on, Joe Rogan's podcast or really anywhere except for maybe with Meghan McCain on The View, that the depth of her understanding of these issues is extremely shallow. And she's joining on the bandwagon. There's no reason to think that she's thinking about this any more than she's thought about anything else. Frankly.
Which is sad, because this is her primary thing.
Well, yeah, and this is a twofer for people. It undermines a strong progressive voice in the House, and also supposedly protects Israel from critique.
So we've talked about this offline, personally, and now on the show, but it's easy to spot anti-Semitism when it's a bunch of crazy people with tiki torches screaming, "Jews will not replace us."
Yes.
What's trickier is tweets like Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's recently deleted about how Israel has, quote, hypnotized the world to carry out, quote, evil. That is harder to spot as anti-Semitic, which makes it more dangerous, you think. How so?
Does make it more dangerous because, as you said, when you see people marching with tiki torches, or you hear the Pittsburgh killer writing on social media, "All Jews must die," that's very obviously eliminationist. The problem with anti-Semitism from the far left is that it oftentimes is smuggled into the mainstream under the guise of progressive values. So it says about itself, "I'm just standing up for the downtrodden Palestinians," which they are. "I am just standing up for justice. I'm standing against racism." And so that kind of language is a siren song, including to Jews, 75% of whom vote for Democrats. And so that's the problem with it, is that it's not as easy to spot, oftentimes because it says we're just about criticizing Israel. In the case of
Did Nancy Pelosi shut it down?
Nancy Pelosi shut it down very aggressively with Ilhan Omar. The problem is that she still has a spot on the
Right.
Congressional Foreign Affairs Committee.
Right.
And that's a real question.
Right. That's the problem. is that this made-up anti-Semitism that I'm seeing has not, even though it's been addressed, it's not been effective in trying to get her out of a policy position where she can actually do the things that Bari Weiss said were legitimate, which was bringing some justice to people who are being oppressed. And sometimes things are hard to spot because they're not there. Now, as one of those 75% who are apparently not sophisticated enough, as a 50-some-odd-year-old man, to be aware of anti-Semitism, I frankly am offended by that. How's that? I'm offended. And I would like the New York Times to address that columnist who's telling the world that I'm not capable of it. My Jewish education involved teachers with a tattoo on their arm with numbers. So I don't need to be told by Bari Weiss that I don't know anti-Semitism when I see it. I was watching helicopters fly over Caesarea on the way to bomb Lebanon when Bari Weiss was maybe not even in diapers yet. So I don't need to be told that I'm deluded about anti-Semitism. That's really offensive. And I want the New York Times to censure her, frankly.
Well, if bigotry of the left is dangerous because it appears like social justice, isn't bigotry from the center even more dangerous?
I mean, look, she's going around promoting people, okay, who it's indisputable they are gateways to right-wing ethno-nationalism. So maybe she should be looking in her own work for those people who are not seeing where anti-Semitism comes. It may be the case that Dave Rubin and Sam Harris are not anti-Semitic, but certainly they've given a platform to people who have spread these type of things. And they have given a platform to people who have given a platform to. So, I mean, honestly, the New York Times should really be looking into Bari Weiss, because this is pretty offensive stuff.
This is her primary thing, too. Like all the stuff about being a reasonable centrist. It's like, oh, you can seem reasonable on like these social issues, but no, when it comes to Zionism, she is a member of the right.
Well, and of course, like so many of these other people, I mean, first of all, if you genuinely had a robust, classical, like ACLU style commitment to open society and free debate and so on, I could imagine people that I think I have more respect maybe for like the kind of free speech absolutist position than others do, even though it isn't necessarily mine, but I have a lot of respect for it. And if they were sincere at all, they would be all over literal state legislation suppressing people's freedom of speech relative to a sovereign nation state. So not only is she hypocritical on the face of it, she's, structurally hypocritical in the sense of going back to her college activism, trying to silence academics.